our website for those who missed this session or who want to watch it again. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. This evening's session will focus on an overview of the feedback received on the initial draft and a review of the recommended revision to the plan. As a reminder, today's session was prepared by the Office of Student Assignment, and the information we will review with you this evening is a subset of the full presentation that was shared with the board during their work session on October 21. Several supplemental slides related to the development of this year's plan were also shared with the board during their work session on October 21. You can find these with the board materials for the October 21 work session. 5B is an updated version of the Public Engagement Summary Report. 5C is a copy of the initial draft of the 2026-27 proposal. 5D is a copy of the data reports used to inform project enrollment for impacted schools. 5E is a copy of the PDF versions of the current draft of proposed attendance boundary changes that allow you to zoom in to the street level. And 5F is a review of information shared with the board during previous work sessions. You can access all of these materials and find additional resources by visiting the 2026 Enrollment Proposal page on our district website. Again, this evening's session will focus on an overview of the feedback received on the initial draft and a review of the recommended revision to the plan. Before we begin, let me go over some logistics. Our session will last for no more than an hour and a half. We will begin with a presentation and conclude by responding to questions from today's session. We recognize that now and throughout the session, you may have questions regarding the proposal or the recommended stability rules. To capture your set questions, we will be using the Q&A feature within Google Meet. To access this feature from a computer, please click on the grid shape in the toolbar on your screen. If you're using a mobile device, select the three dots first, then select the icon with the three shapes. You should then see a Q&A feature identified by a question mark icon. To ensure your questions are anonymous, our host and moderators will be monitoring the Q&A for questions and capturing them throughout this evening's session. Once you see that your question has been removed from the Q&A, that means your question has been successfully captured by our moderators and you do not need to resubmit your question. We will make every effort to respond to your questions toward the end of our session. In addition, we will use your questions to update the FAQ portion of our website. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. In addition, we are asking that you share any specific feedback related to the revised draft of the 2026-27 school enrollment proposal via Thought Exchange. The Thought Exchange will remain open through November 9. After it is closed, we will summarize the feedback received and will share this summary with the board during their work session on November 18th. No one will be personally identified in the summary. Before I turn things over to Susan, we would like to remind you that today's session will focus on an overview of the feedback received on the initial draft and a review of the recommended revisions to the plan. By the end of this evening's session, you will have had an opportunity to briefly review the assignment planning process, review the feedback received on the initial draft, better understand the revision included in the updated draft, quickly review the timeline for the planning process, and, perhaps most importantly, submit questions you have that will help you gain a better understanding of the potential impacts of the proposed plan for your family. And now, I will turn things over to Susan.
Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate you welcoming all of us here today. And for those of you that are joining us this evening, we are extremely grateful for this opportunity to share with you this important information. And again, most importantly, to get to your questions. To provide some context, on September 2nd, staff members presented the initial draft of the 2026-27 enrollment proposal to the Board of Education during a work session. The draft included proposed changes specifically for the 2026-27 school year. On October 21st, staff also met with the board again and reviewed the feedback that had been received to date on the initial draft and shared one adjustment to the original proposal in response to that feedback. As a reminder, this year's student assignment proposal specifically is focusing on the opening of Hilltop Needmore Elementary and aligning feeder patterns related to the opening of that school, as well as aligning feeder patterns in other areas of the district in response to other recent assignment changes, along with relieving capped and overcrowded schools while filling our underutilized schools. The proposal does also include generous stability rules that will allow most families impacted by the recommendations to stay at their current school as long as they can provide their own transportation. All of the information that we shared during this evening session, along with other tools and resources that can help you better understand the recommendations included in the revised draft of the proposal, can be found on our district website. The enrollment proposal site that you see here is specific to the enrollment proposal. It's what I call a time-limited site. It'll remain open through about January, and it includes all the information specific to this year's proposal. So any frequently asked questions, videos, those types of resources, they're all posted there. The site that you see here listed on the lower portion of the screen is a perpetual site, or a site that's open all year long, year over year. And this is a great resource for those of you that are interested in learning more about the planning process overall and the 6 steps that we follow to get to sort of our full complement of assignment recommendations for the entire school year. We recognize that some of you may just now be joining us and may not be aware that we're using the Q&A feature in the Google Meet to be able to capture your questions. So please, if you have any questions throughout the session now or as we continue on, look for the grid shape on the bottom of your screen if you're using a desktop or a laptop computer, or if you're using a mobile device, look for those 3 dots. Ultimately, you're trying to navigate your way to this question mark icon so that you can go ahead and post your question. To make sure that your questions are anonymous, our moderators will be monitoring the Q&A feature. Once you see that your question has been removed from the Q&A, that lets you know it's been successfully captured, and we'll address it toward the end of our session. Y otra vez, si necesita ayuda en español, por favor, envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. We also want to continue to encourage you to participate in this thought exchange. It's a little bit different from the one from the initial draft proposal. This allows you to dig a little bit deeper and provide more context to your feedback. So we do encourage those of you that have more rich comments to provide. We started using this last year in response to feedback about the thought exchange being maybe a little too restrictive in the number of characters. So if you have any specific feedback you would like for the planning team or the board to know about, please continue to contribute to this thought exchange, and it'll remain open through November 9th. The policy that guides the development of our district's annual enrollment plans is embedded within Board Policy 4150, which directs staff to balance, to the extent reasonable, 4 goals or factors outlined in these pillars, which are student achievement, stability, proximity, and operational efficiency. And you can see here that each of those 4 pillars has a very specific definition as listed in policy, which may or may not match what I would consider a dictionary definition. But for more information or a complete copy of the policy, please continue to visit our website. You can get the entire copy of the policy, as well as view a video that helps to explain this policy in greater detail if you're interested in learning more about that. And so now, to ensure that you have a better understanding of how this year's proposal was developed, we're going to take just a brief moment to go through the planning process and, more importantly, the public engagement progress, particularly since the release of the initial draft. So in addition to the guidance that's provided by Board Policy 4150, we follow a 6-step process. And as you can see, we're actively in step 4 and we're nearing the end of that step. And once this process has completed and the enrollment plan is approved, we'll continue along this planning process and look at maybe what we need to do about capped schools in the district, as well as addressing other school utilization concerns through other methods. As you can see, this step in the process, step 4, so steps 1, 2, and 3, you can see those outlined here, has 3 core phases. The first step in this process is the early public engagement, or phase, I should say. The next phase is reviewing the annual goals with the board to make sure we have alignment on what should be included in the plan once it's finalized and developed. And then, of course, developing and presenting that plan for review and approval. So although it is a multi-year process and we're constantly looking forward in time and looking at our projected crowding and looking at our historical trends, we do only present enrollment plans for the next school year for review and approval one at a time, essentially. We're currently in the 3rd phase of this step of the process. And at this point in the year, we're often asked, do you even listen? What do you do with the feedback that you collect? Does it even impact the assignment planning process? Because we can understand that in some cases, it might feel like it doesn't. But the short answer is yes, it does. The community feedback that we've received from both families and community members over the last several years, including this planning cycle, have really impacted the way that we develop our plans, the way that we communicate about our plans, and the planning process itself. One example of that is expanding our eligibility for stability transfers. In recent, it's starting to feel normal because we've been doing this for about 2 or 3 years, but in years past, they were much more restrictive, included much fewer students and families, and literally only lasted for 1 or 2 school years. There was no ability to have, let's say, a 2nd grader finish out their 5th grade experience at the same school. It might just be for 1 year. So those have become much more generous and expanded to allow many more students and families to be eligible to access those stability transfers. Another example is changing our strategy for developing attendance areas for new schools. We now include a healthy mixture of new and developing residential communities that don't have very many students, if any, along with some existing neighborhoods. What this does is it means that those new schools will open with a little bit less enrollment those first couple of years and will more slowly or gradually fill. It also means that we're delaying the relief for the overcrowded schools in the region. It'll just take a little bit longer for that relief to be realized. However, it's much more stable for families and much more disruptive overall for both families and the school system. So we've taken that feedback from the community and really taken it to heart. The first school that we tried that strategy with was Woods Creek Elementary. It's been very successful. This current school year, all of the elementary schools that opened and even the high school that opened used this same strategy. And so you're going to see a difference in how quickly those new schools fill, as well as how quickly we're able to relieve the overcrowded schools in the region. However, it does provide more stability for families. Another example is improving our feeder pattern alignment. We've heard loud and clear across the district, regardless of region, that having those 5th graders be able to matriculate on with 6th graders into the same middle school, or 8th graders go on to the same high school with their 9th grade, in their 9th grade year, that having that sort of cohort where the students can travel together from one school to the next is really important for families, including the calendar alignment that often comes with those types of matches. And so we've been working really hard over the last several years to include those types of alignments in our enrollment planning process. These are just a few. There are plenty more, but we just want to let you know that, yes, your feedback is important. It is significant. And if it doesn't change the assignment plan for your particular family, it does shape and inform overall the strategy about how we do develop our enrollment plan. So it is critical and important, and your voices are very much needed and heard. Just as a quick reminder of this part of the process, this step 4, if you will, phase 1 is that early public engagement for this year's planning process. That happened between March and May of this year. So that was concluded well before we got into the summer months. What that did for us is it gave us a a set of outlines, some planning implications, if you will. So all the thoughts and ideas that were captured through those public engagement activities really led the planning team to focus on these core areas. So continuing to identify ways to provide stability, as I mentioned, of assignment for students and families, really working a little bit more on that K-8 calendar alignment piece for families whenever it's feasible, working to provide that K-12 cohort or feeder pattern continuity for students whenever it's practical, acknowledging that there are unique regional concerns when developing capacity recommendations or capacity management recommendations. In some parts of the district, year-round is a feasible solution. In others, it might not be as feasible. So just keeping those things in mind and not using a single district approach to managing enrollment growth across the district. And then, of course, taking all of that and balancing that sort of primary desire for proximity and stability that families and community has shared with us with our need to maintain student achievement and operational efficiency goals across the district. So for a complete summary of all the thoughts and ideas that were captured throughout this year's process and previous processes, please visit our website. But for this year's process in particular, the updated version of the public engagement summary would be your best resource to really see all of the information that's been collected specific to this year's enrollment plan. The next phase in this step of the process, if you will, is to clarify with the board what those goals are for this year's plan specifically. So in May, we had that clarifying conversation or discussion with our board to make sure that we knew what all needed to be included. So obviously, with the opening of a new elementary school, we did need to include recommendations for those. But based on all that feedback we've received, we were also directed to make sure we were aligning middle and high school feeder patterns as a result of those changes and addressing any domino impacts, sort of if there's some schools that maybe were losing a lot of students as a new school opens, is there anything we can do to maintain and balance enrollment across all of the schools in the region? Another thing that we were asked to look at was the impact of renovation projects. Oftentimes, when we do a major renovation in the district, it increases the capacity of a school. And so we are asked to look to see if that might help relieve crowded schools in, nearby once those renovations are complete. I will say for this year's plan, the planning team opted not to include specific recommendations. The one main school that we're talking about is Swift Creek Elementary, and instead wanted to monitor how it transitions into its new space and what enrollment growth looks like before making any boundary adjustments based on the new capacity that'll be available at the school. We used a similar strategy when Fuquay-Varina Middle was reconstructed and when Balcom Elementary was reconstructed, and that was really received favorably by the community as well as the schools. Another area that we were asked to look at was to continue looking at ways to relieve crowded and cap schools. You will see recommendations related to that goal, as well as reducing transportation inefficiencies wherever possible. And then, of course, finalizing some work from last year's plan. There were some elementary changes that resulted in, there's really not an easy way to say it, some kind of wonky feeder patterns. And so just trying to clean those up for families so that moving forward, they would have a nice cohort feeder pattern as well as some K-8 calendar alignment. And you will see those recommendations included in this year's plan. So thinking on all of those things, all of that public engagement we've received all this year, as well as in prior years, in addition to those really specific goals for this particular plan, we were asked to then look at all of that and come up with the best plan possible to impact the least number of families possible that achieved all of those goals. So the initial draft of recommendations that were presented to the board in September did reflect all of that. So again, all of those were addressed, especially those key factors that were outlined in that May work session. Following that presentation, we immediately started hosting and engaging in public engagement opportunities for families. We hosted some virtual events, some in-person events, as well as some asynchronous or online opportunities for families to engage. So on October 21st, we shared all of that feedback with the board. In addition, that did lead the planning team to come up with one recommended adjustment to the plan as a result of that feedback. Again, if you're just now joining us or if you're just now thinking of a question, please use that Q&A feature that's here embedded in Google Meet to post your questions. Once you see that your question has been removed from the Q&A, that lets you know that our moderators have successfully captured your question, and we're going to get to those as quickly as possible. I get just through a little bit more background information. So again, I just mentioned that following the presentation of the draft, we launched into some public engagement activities, and I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of what we shared with the board. We will not sit on this very long. If you want the full debrief, please watch the recording of the board work session from October 21st or review the materials that are posted online. But I do want to let you know that hosting those 3 virtual informations and that 1 in-person open house, we had over 800 total participants either live or through watching the recordings of those sessions, at least through October 14th. So some of those may continue to be viewed into today. So that lets us know we've had a pretty good participation in those events. In tonight's session, as I just mentioned, we will not thoroughly review all of the feedback that was collected, but we will share an overview of what was presented to the board. So for example, here you can see that we shared that as a result of the virtual session that we had related to the Hilltop Needmore Elementary campus and all of the recommendations that were affiliated with that set of recommendations, the key takeaways really revolved around clarity of rules, specifically those related to the plan like stability eligibility. There were questions about calendar and feeder patterns, and of course, concerns that are specific to the opening of a new school, like staffing plans, transportation details, even some questions about the facility itself. Again, we're going to zip through these. The virtual session focusing on Apex and the Southwestern area had a few key takeaways, largely around calendar concerns, both alignment and just calendar offerings. Clearly, the movement of existing families versus new families as part of the assignment recommendations. Concerns also specific to the changing of schools, such as special education services, even course offerings or academic opportunities. So a lot of very specific, nuanced questions and key takeaways related to those recommendations. We also hosted a session related to our Eastern area recommendations, which are to help relieve crowding. And for this session, the key takeaways, again, revolved around calendar concerns. We see that as a hot topic. Clarification on things like stability rules and the magnet programs in that region, as well as concerns that are specific to a growing region, like potential future assignment changes and even opportunities to learn more about those future plans. So again, I know I did not do a good service to those, but you can read the full summaries in our public engagement summary report or watch the recording with the board where we went through these in a little bit greater detail. Here you can also see a little bit of information about that in-person open house that we hosted. Here we had families come in that wanted to talk with either school-based or district staff about the services and support that we offer to help families transition to a new school. So you can see there were several departments and schools that were in attendance to help our families answer any questions and talk through any of those concerns. In addition, we were fortunate to host it at the actual site of the new Hilltop Needmore Elementary School. So some families were able to get a mini peek, a mini tour, if you will, to just kind of get a peek at the facilities there as well. So again, that was our live and in-person sessions that we hosted. Another thing that we did was to make sure we used our digital assets, if you will, our website, things like Thought Exchange and other resources, videos, frequently asked questions, all of those things that can kind of be accessed on your own time. Sometimes people will say asynchronously. Here you can see that we had over 16,000 views of the proposal site alone, and you can see all the rest of the numbers here as well. But again, good, healthy participation just so that we could gather as much feedback as possible going into the revision. But one thing I do want to pause and talk just a little bit about was the original Thought Exchange that we hosted. It did ask families, community members, participants to share their concerns or questions about the initial draft of the plan. As you can see here, we had well over 800 participants who shared just over 750 thoughts. The ratings was well above the 30 ratings per thought ratio that we target. So that means we had really good, healthy participation. And you can see here on this slide, it's tiny, but a quick distribution of which regions were represented, as well as the fact that it looks like 94% of participants identified as either parents or guardians. One of the things that you can see is that as a result of that participation, 5 overarching themes emerged: community disruption, equity and fairness, school ranking concerns, transportation and commuting, as well as calendar changes. This slide shows the total number of thoughts aligned with each of those categories. As part of the thought exchange experience, participants are also asked to rank randomly sorted thoughts that are shared by other participants. And as you can see here, the average ranking for the highest rated group of thoughts is just over 3.5. That 3.5 line is right about here. This means that there's a low alignment across these themes, which basically means that participants kind of feel one way or the other. There's not a common feeling where, let's say, one of these is getting a 4 or higher ranking. It's just information for the planning team to consider when reviewing all of the feedback that's given. One thing we did this year that's a little bit different is we dug a little bit deeper. Those 5 overarching themes with that 3.5 kind of rating kind of left us a little perplexed. Where is the support? Where is the nuance for some of these thoughts? So we looked a little deeper and came up with some granular themes. And as you can see here, I won't read them all off. We stretched them out across about 10 different themes. It really allowed us to parse out and see different, even individual communities. You could see their names popping up because there were so many participants from those communities. Again, these are organized by the number of thoughts per these more granular or detailed themes. And again, when we start looking at those star ratings, we see that it levels off a little bit. There's a bit of a tapering over on the right-hand side of the screen, but most categories were hovering right around that 3.5 mark and then started to dip just below it as we got down to these other 4 themes. So all this means is that this is information that helped the planning team to better understand the specific experiences and perspectives of the participants, as well as to weigh those against the district's concerns and needs to try to come up with the best maybe revisions to the plan, or at least explanations as to why revisions weren't being recommended. Again, if you're interested in diving into this in greater detail, I would encourage you to visit our website, look at that public engagement summary report. But one thing that I really thought was extremely sort of enlightening and that the planning team really sort of focused in on was that whether you supported the idea of opposing, right? We don't want to change. Please don't reassign us. Leave us at our school. We love our school. We love our community that we've built at our school. Please move somebody else if you have to move somebody, but please don't move us. Or I kind of get it. We get that there's some schools that are really crowded. There's some schools that are underutilized. We get that this will distribute the students a little bit more evenly across a couple of schools. This might even help distribute resources a little bit better, right? So 2 sides of that coin, roughly. Regardless of if you supported the idea of balancing enrollment or keeping assignments the same, the common ground really fell in these categories of stability and fairness. So regardless of how participants felt overall, this idea of minimizing disruption for students and ensuring that the process is fair and well explained was really critical to most participants. And so that is something that the planning team also really looked at when presenting the information to the board. So again, I've shared with you all of this information on our website. Please continue to go there for those more detailed explanations, or if you want to spend a little bit more time looking at the interactive reports that were prepared for the thought exchange, so you can look at those individual comments and thoughts and see how the groups were created. We encourage you to do that at your leisure. Again, please continue posting your questions. I do feel like a handful have popped in there. So just continue to add those questions to the to the Q&A feature here in the Google Meet. Reminder, we're keeping them anonymous. So if you see that your question has been removed, that lets you know that our moderators have successfully captured your question, and we'll get to it in hopefully just a few minutes, because that was the bulk of the presentation. So as a result, only one recommended adjustment was shared with the board during their session on October 21st. The planning team did carefully and thoughtfully review all of the feedback that was collected after the initial draft, in addition to all the feedback that was collected prior to the release, right? So in those early public engagement sessions in the spring and in prior school years, and looked at those in alignment with the district's goals and responsibilities, facility use, assignment policy, all of those sorts of things. Again, we're using the Q&A feature. I've seen a handful of people try to raise their hand. We won't be able to use that feature tonight, so please just post your questions to the Q&A feature, and we'll get to those very, very quickly. So the current version of the proposal specifically reflects the guidance provided by Board Policy 4150, the input and feedback that's been collected and gathered from families and community members really over the last several years, as well as most particularly this year. the continuing need for our beautiful, growing, wonderful district to address its capped and overcrowded schools while being mindful of future school openings. The desire for families to have K-8 calendar continuity, the desire for families to have K-12 cohort continuity, the need for the district to continue its efforts to reduce high concentrations of poverty, promoting integration and diversity, as well as the need to support our operational and transportation efficiency goals. So all of that is factored together, and that's what really shaped the enrollment proposal that was shared with the board back in September. So with that being said, let's take a moment to review the recommended adjustment that was shared on October 21st. As you can see here, highlighted roughly in the middle of your screen, this is a revision. The original chart that was shared with the board provided no traditional calendar application option for the families that are currently assigned to White Oak that are proposed to be assigned to Turner Creek. It wasn't necessarily an oversight. It was just thought of, trying to reduce transportation, candidly. However, in reviewing all of Turner Creek Elementary's base attendance area, the remaining portions of it have Balcom Elementary as a traditional calendar application option, looking at the feedback that was provided through the thought exchange and through the in-person sessions and through the open house, adding in that same traditional calendar option that all the rest of the families in the remaining, the sort of original part, if you will, of the attendance area for Turner Creek felt like a reasonable thing to do to provide some sort of traditional calendar option, since they are being asked to go from a traditional school to a multi-track year-round school. The middle school option was already in place, so it didn't need to be added. So the families that are at White Oak here in this section are also currently assigned to Mills Park Middle. They would be recommended to be assigned to Salem Middle. So by base assignment, they have year-round calendar continuity from K-8, but they also then would have traditional calendar options at Balcom Elementary and Apex Middle. So no change had to be recommended at the middle school level. It was included in the initial draft. We do recognize that, the whole planning team recognizes that some families would like to see additional changes to the proposal, and there were some very detailed rationale and explanations provided to the board as to why those recommendations were not made. If you want to see those rationale, I encourage you to either watch or review the October 21st board work session or review those materials, and we certainly can address some of those questions tonight if you still have them. But again, we didn't want to belabor this part. We wanted to get to your questions. So I'm going to get through one last information item, and then that'll give us the bulk of tonight's time to really address your questions. So this last information item is just, where are we? What comes next? So as you can see, it's been a relatively lengthy process. It officially kicked off on March 4th, where we presented to the board during work session what our public engagement plan for this year's planning process was, and we kicked off our engagement sessions back in March. We continuously met with the board about various different topics and items leading up to the presentation that was held last week. And now all that remains on the calendar for this year's process from the board's perspective is to receive a final draft of the plan at a work session on November 18th, with an expectation that they would approve some version of the plan later that same night at their board meeting. They did host their public hearing on October 21st, and they'll be able to have all kinds of information in response to that public hearing prior to the November 18th work session. And as soon as it's available, we'll post it to the website as well. The other thing to let you know is what you all can continue to participate in as community members and parents. So the website will continue to be open and updated. So we do encourage you to continue, in particular, to visit the enrollment proposal site, because that's where we will update frequently asked questions, or FAQs. So even after tonight's session, if we identify anything that's not clearly listed, we'll add it. In addition, the public hearing will have some FAQs posted there as well as a result of the public hearing that was held last week. The thought exchange will remain open through November 9th. And of course, tonight's session, once we're complete, the recording will be posted to our website. So if you want to watch it again, or if you want to share it with someone who couldn't join tonight, you're more than welcome to do that. And with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Eric so I can get a sip of water and we can dive into your questions.
I am here. It's taking a moment for my camera to pop back on. All right, so I know we've reviewed a lot of information and would like to address as many of your questions as possible. Please take a few minutes. Feel free to post any questions or comments using the Q&A feature. Now, remember, I can only ask questions. So questions we can answer, comments in directions make it very difficult to speak to. So if you would like to ask a question, feel free to post a question. We'll start by addressing questions that were submitted during this session. And if we run out of gas and there's anything that's kind of brimming it at the top, we'll go ahead and address some of those. Let's take a look and see what's come in. All right. So if the proposal goes through, I'm going to have one child in traditional and one in year round.
Okay.
How do I manage that?
Sure. So that really depends. So I'm going to answer this in all the ways. One, for some families, that actually works. I know that may sound crazy to some families who've never experienced it before, but there are a handful of families that really enjoy that slightly different calendar. So if that works for your family, that is fine. If that does not work for your family, then you'll have options. One of the tenets in our transfer policy is that K-8 calendar alignment is something we try to work toward. Also in the online application process for year round, which is happening now, it's mixed in with the magnet schools. We also look at K-8 calendar alignment for your family group that way. So if you want both students to be on year round, and there's an application year-round school for your address, you could go ahead and put that application in now, and the priorities would give preference to that. If that doesn't work for you, or if you were looking more for the traditional match, then you've got a couple of different options. One, most of our magnet schools actually operate on a traditional calendar schedule. So if there are any magnet schools that you have priority for that you think would actually meet your family's needs and give you the calendar alignment, that's one option. If that's not a preferred option for you, then you also could use the regular request for transfer period, or what we sometimes call the hardship transfer period. That opens, I'm going to get it wrong, Eric. I know it's March 3rd, 2nd, March 2nd. I always get the actual date wrong. So it'll open around March 2nd, and that'll be open for about 10 days. You can put in your request there for whichever way you want to work it. Please know that if it's an identified calendar application school for your address, that does mean it comes with district transportation, but it doesn't mean it's the only school you can request. So if there's another traditional school that you're looking for at the elementary or middle school level that maybe you could drive to, that's close to work, that meets your community needs, you can ask for those as well, as long as you can provide your own transportation. You can put up to 3 requests on your transfer. So you can put up to 3 different schools. And then you can put in your reasoning and be sure to type in something about the siblings and trying to get your calendar alignment. And then staff does have within policy, depending on capacity. Certainly, if you're asking for a capped school, that's going to be a non-starter for staff because we have to hold those seats for kids that live in the community. But if it's a non-capped school, or it's a school that has space for availability, then those would be schools we might be able to help you out with. So it's a long-winded answer to say, use one of the application periods. So I would say, I'm going to plug our team. If you have a very specific question about your child, you can send something to that student assignment email we've been popping up, and we can help you figure out for your family what the best path would be to try to get what you're trying to accomplish.
I am a full-time, or I understand full-time WCPSS employees can have their children attend their school. Mm-hmm. I'm full-time and my child stays with me at White Oak. Mm-hmm. Would they be able to continue on to Mills Park to remain in that feeder pattern cohort?
Eric, what do we do when it's a cap school and I don't work there? I think it gets a little harder, right? It's a little bit more challenging. If it was on the same campus, it's a little bit easier because the board did make provisions for campus schools. If they're not on the same campus, it would be difficult for us to say yes unless the cap has been removed by the time your student is old enough to go to the school. So that, I think, would be a question to ask one of our staff members so that we can know the grade level of your student. We could know the age at which they'd be progressing into Mills Park Middle. Or you could look for other traditional options in your area that might have space and meet your needs. I do see a handful of people trying to use the raise your hand feature. We won't be using that in tonight's meeting. Please just type your questions into the Q&A feature, and we'll be using that to capture and organize all of our questions tonight. And again, if you have a very personal question about your personal family, I'm going to figure out a way to find that slide with the student assignment email, Eric, while you're pulling up the next question, so that people can send their specific personal individual family question to that email. I think here it is. Oh, that's the tiniest version. Let me find a bigger one. There we go. So this email right here, if you'll send one to that email with your student's information and your contact information, one of our staff will be more than happy to help you figure out what the best path is for you and your family, and what might be realistic, kind of like that Caps Mills Park Middle question.
Can you advise on the transfer periods for 25, 26? Or rather, 26, 27, I think is the appropriate.
Yeah, so we'll answer both, right? So
Yeah.
for the current school year, there is the transfer windows doesn't really ever close in terms of you can always put in a request. It's just your eligibility for an appeal is probably passed. You need to put them in that original 10-day window to be eligible to appeal any decisions to the Board of Education. But you can always request a transfer throughout the school year, because we know families move in the middle of the year. They might want to ask for something different. So that's always there. For 26, 27, the next school year, it'll open March 2nd, and it'll stay open for about 10 days. Then we'll close it, because there'll be a lot of requests that come in during that period. We'll close it so we can process all of those requests, and then the general transfer window where you're not eligible for an appeal to the board would reopen a little bit later.
This is always a difficult question. So why are new communities getting preference over older communities?
So it's not preference, and I'm sorry that it feels that way. What it is in some communities, we have schools that are currently capped or overcrowded that need immediate relief. They need immediate relief. And the only way to provide immediate relief is to move current students. And so that's why in these really challenging areas where we have capped or overcrowded schools, in Zebulon Elementary, we have a really, really overcrowded school that's just shy of being capped. So we are moving actual students, not new neighborhoods. White Oak Elementary, severely capped, continuing to grow, no end in sight to the growth in that particular attendance area. So we need to move actual current students. In the Hilltop area, it's a little bit of a mixture. Because it's a new school, so we've got a mixture of existing neighborhoods, existing students, as well as some newer developments that are continuing to develop or have not yet started to develop. So that school feels a little bit slower. Valentine needs immediate relief. Banks needs immediate relief. So existing students are the ones that are being sent to Hilltop from those schools. Vance Elementary needs immediate relief. So existing students are being recommended to be assigned to Banks. Willow Spring High needs immediate relief. So students that are already in existence are the ones being recommended. So that's the reason for finding existing neighborhoods. It's not about a preference. It's not about giving any kind of priority to one neighborhood or the other. It's about solving the immediate challenge. That being said, the board very much recognizes how destabilizing that can be for existing families, and have gone above and beyond and accepted staff and the planning team's recommendation to have more generous stability rules. Just 3 short years ago, if we were making an elementary assignment out of a capped school to an underutilized school, the best you could have asked for was maybe that your 4th and 5th graders could stay, and that if you had younger siblings, they could just stay the 1 or 2 years that the 4th and 5th grader were there. That was the best you could ask for. And once that 4th or 5th grader moved on to middle school, that younger student would be zipped over to the new assignment. They would no longer have their eligibility because they were anchored to that older student. Now the board has accepted staff's recommendation over the last 2 years. I don't see them deviating this year, that any student, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, going into 5th grade, if they're a rising 1st through 5th grade student, any of them that are already attending the school, if it's not Hilltop, that's the only place where it's a little bit more restricted. But at the White Oak example, the Zebulon example, the Vance and to Banks example, all of those, the students at any grade would be eligible for stability, and they personally could stay and remain through the end of 5th grade. In addition, they could bring that younger kindergarten sibling in with them if they're coming in this year. If they're not coming in this year and they're coming in a future year, then the regular transfer process would allow us to let that kindergarten student join the older student. So as long as you have an older student at the school, the younger one can keep joining them. Same thing is true at middle school, same thing is true at high school. So these are the most generous stability rules the district has ever used. It's our third year of trying to put them into place. So I know that might not sound like a lot, but it's a huge change in trying to provide more stability for families than we ever were able to do in the past.
Susan, this next question may test history a little bit.
Okay.
And you're a good person to answer it, so
Okay.
that'll work. And when I say history, it talks about the length and breadth of this process, because lots of people really don't understand how long this takes to really think through all these pieces.
Sure.
Why is there a proposal on the table that impacts a district that currently does not have a representative on the Board of Education?
Okay. So probably four things here. One, every board member, although they're voted on by a particular district, represent the interest of the entire district. In District 8 in particular, Mr. Swanson and Mr. Hagerty have also doubled up to make sure that they're splitting that district and providing direct representation while there's not a specific District 8 member in place. So that is not 100% true statement in the sense that this area does have people that are representing the needs at the board, the needs and the voices of the community at the board level, and they are actively. Mr. Swanson was one of the few board members that actually came to one of our information sessions to represent the community. So it's, please know they take that very seriously. But second, all board members represent the entire district as well. So you've got board members from across the district that are asking questions that pertain to each of the areas. And then third, in terms of length and breadth of the process, these processes start in earnest usually 3 years in advance. And so board members are participating in conversations along with the planning team as the preparations are being made. This particular community, I'm thinking Division 8 or District 8 in particular, and the White Oak to Turner Creek and Mills Park to Salem Middle, this has been on the table for a couple of years now. The first time we came out to the community, the first question we ask is, should we just convert White Oak to year round? Would that be more stable? Because you could stay at the school, and the community was very clear that that was not a preferred option. And so responding to that feedback and the district representation at the time, the recommendation was to look for other ways to solve the problem here or the challenge or address the challenge here. And so coming up with a recommendation to reassign some students while we're waiting to see how the impact of all the future developments that are coming and the existing developments that are continuing to generate new families. So it's not 100% accurate to say that there's not representation for these families, but I do get the sentiment and the feeling. I do understand that. And that's for the board to kind of rise up to. Please, just as a friendly reminder, if you've used the Q&A feature to post a question and it hasn't been answered or addressed just yet, we're getting to it. So you don't need to repost the same question multiple times. Once it's been removed, that lets you know that our moderators have successfully captured, and we're getting to it. We're just running down the list. So we're getting there.
Apologies if I missed this. When will the window open close to elect to stay at your current school? And also, is that request to stay a guaranteed acceptance?
Oh, wonderful question. And we did not actually talk about that tonight. So I'm very glad that they asked the question. The stability transfer window will open. I can't give you a concrete date because there's some technology involved, but it'll open shortly after the board approves the plan. So if the board approves the plan on November 18th, fingers crossed, we're going to try to have that stability window ready to rock and roll that Monday or Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and then we'll keep it open for 10 business days. We're not going to ask you to put in your applications during the Thanksgiving holiday if you don't need to, but we'll keep it open for a good little while. We'll send you messages directly to your inbox, so make sure that you have not blocked Wake County emails. That's important. We'll send messages to your current school principal so they can help to remind you. And we will send them to you about every 3 days unless you submit your request. So if you choose not to submit the request, be prepared to be annoyed. We will send multiple reminders to you just to make sure you don't miss the window. If you do submit your request, let's say on day 1 or 2, then you'll stop getting our reminders because it's already taken care of. So it'll open late November. It'll be open into early December, long enough for everyone to get their request submitted. And then the question about the guarantee. If you submit it in that window, yes, 100% it is guaranteed. And that's the reason why we do it in this time period, is so that we can get everybody seated who wants to stay before particularly a capped school starts looking at their overflow list to determine if they need to call anybody back. You're going to get your seat first. The other thing is, if you're not quite sure, if you're on the fence, put the application in, because that's the only window we can guarantee that we can approve it. If you wait until March to ask for it, there's no guarantee. If the school is already capped, already full on a particular grade level, already overflowing students, or just crowded, we might have to say no. So the only time we can say yes is in that late November, December time period. If you do that because you're not quite sure, or you're not sure which families or best friends or community members or how carpool is going to work, and you get to March and you realize we want to go to our newly assigned school, you can put that request in and we'll approve that one easily in March. That one we can guarantee, because back to base is basically a guaranteed as long as it's not capped, which won't be the case in this situation. So we can do a back to base transfer approval for those families in March, much easier than a late stability request. Late stability requests are very difficult to approve.
What is the priority list of accepting transfer applications? Now, this is specific.
Okay.
Our daughter will be a senior at Willow Spring next year.
So I'm assuming that the student would be proposed to be assigned to Middle Creek, which means they'll be guaranteed to be approved as long as they put the request in during the stability transfer window. If you're asking generically, I'd like to go to Willow Spring as a senior, that's going to be pretty low because that school's pretty crowded. If you're not already attending the school, already assigned to the school, it will be difficult to get into a school like Willow Spring, because that's part of the reason for this recommendation, is to relieve the crowding at the school. But if you're attending today as a junior and you're going to be a rising senior, it'll be guaranteed to be approved as long as you put it in December. November, December.
Are all students guaranteed to get admitted to Apex Middle School who want a traditional option?
Oh, that's a very different question. Okay, so the traditional calendar application requests, we cannot say guaranteed on those. We do our absolute best to help families find a solution to get their calendar continuity, particularly if they have students on elementary and middle school. That's a very nuanced question. So I would encourage that family to maybe send something to the student assignment at wcpss.net email with their students' information, so that the appropriate staff member can guide them appropriately. But I do have to stop short of saying guaranteed on those, because there are limited numbers of seats for the application students.
I live in Holly Springs and attend Oakview. Are there any middle schools that aren't year-round, that are not year-round?
I believe in that region, Holly Ridge is traditional. Apex Friendship, it is capped, is traditional. Apex Middle is somewhat proximate. And then Fuquay-Varina Middle is also traditional, in that that's a stretch, I understand, but just there's not a lot of middle schools in that region. There aren't as many middle schools as elementary schools. That's just standard across the district. But Holly Ridge would probably be the closest traditional calendar middle school with available seats.
Let's see. This is dealing with a specific community situation, so you may wind up dealing with the broader
Broadening
scope
it.
of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Can you explain how Balcom Elementary qualifies as an option for a traditional school for Sutherland community from a proximity standpoint? Mills Park Elementary, Highcroft, Davis are relatively closer.
Yeah, and we've had this question in some of our live sessions as well. There are other traditional schools that may be physically closer, but they don't have the available capacity that Balcom has. With its new renovation, it had an expanded capacity added to it. Some of the schools that you mentioned, Eric, recently came off the cap list. So they're still dealing with their ongoing crowding concerns, or they have a number of older trailer units that the district has been prioritizing to try to at some point get off. And I know for those at Highcroft, they know we've been saying that for quite some time and we haven't managed to get them off just yet. So part of this is the district's long range plan of not continuing to populate schools that need to get things like trailers removed, also to use the space. This sounds really unfair, but the closest school with available capacity. The other reason for Balcom being identified specifically for Sutherland is because Sutherland is part of the group that's being recommended to go from White Oak to Turner Creek. And it's to create that cohort continuity that if any family in that area is going to go traditional, they would go with all the other Turner Creek students to traditional. And that's in line with a lot of the feedback we've been receiving district-wide about creating cohort alignment and feeder patterns, not only in the base assignments, but in the calendar assignment. Application options, I should say.
I'm going down through to look for transfer questions that we've already answered to filter some of those out. And I just want to, someone threw something out and I want to clarify.
Sure.
It says magnet schools and public schools are not the same. How can you suggest a magnet school as an alternate option to a public school? I wonder if the person meant charter school. And understand, magnet schools are part of the Wake County Public School System, folks.
Yeah, our magnet schools are all part of the Wake County Public School System. All of them have a portion of their attendance that is a base assignment or address assignments to the school, and then they bring in students because of their unique magnet programming. It may not be a community school for you because it's not your closest to your community, but all that programming is available and it's part of our Wake County Public school system. Charter schools are not our districted schools. They are technically public schools, but they're not part of Wake County Public Schools. We don't have any oversight over them. We don't know anything about their lottery processes. They manage themselves completely independent of our district. So we can't speak to those schools at all. You know, if you have questions about those, you need to reach out to those schools individually. But the magnet schools are 100% public schools that are part of our public school system. But I could see where someone, particularly if you're living in the far west or the far east or the far south parts of our district, you might think they're not very close, especially if you're thinking about downtown magnets. But Lincoln Heights is a magnet school that's in the Fuquay community. In the east, we have schools like Zebulon Elementary, Zebulon Middle, Wendell Elementary, Wendell Middle, East Wake High. They're all magnet schools. They're all part of our Wake County public school system. So yeah, they're all part of our public schools.
Why does this area have so many year-round and not nearly as many traditional schools?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially if you're a relatively new resident. This goes back to the history thing that you mentioned earlier. We as a district have had nonstop growth since forever. Really 80s, 90s, maybe even slightly before then, but we have been a continuously growing district, which if you live here and you see it and you feel it, you have no idea how different that is from most districts across the country. So being a growing district, we went through a period where we were growing between 5,000 and 8,000 students a year. Around that same pinnacle, the state legislature approved legislation at the elementary level that restricted class size at kindergarten, first, second, and third. And so you may be familiar with those restrictions. Kindergarten is max size is 18, first grade is 16, second and third grade is 17 students per class. When that legislation was approved overnight, essentially we lost around 9,000 classroom seats because we used to fill our classrooms a little bit bigger, maybe 20 or 22 students per class. And that change across our large district essentially meant we lost about 9,000 seats almost immediately. So as a result, we have a lot of year-round schools to help us increase our capacity. Most of our year-round schools give us anywhere between 20 and 30% additional seats without any additional construction costs. So in the early 2000s, we started converting some schools to year-round, and then we started opening schools on year-round, and now that's just been a part of our growth model. So in high growth areas, Apex, Morrisville, Cary, Holly Springs, and even now going into Fuquay, new schools in particular are opening on the year-round calendar to give us that instant extra capacity on day one. And some of our other schools were converted to multi-track year-round several years ago, and are just maintaining those calendars because they give us that additional capacity. So it's really it's a growth management tool.
You said you consider K-8 feeder pattern alignment with requests for transfer, but do you also consider a family with a high schooler on a traditional calendar in requests for transfer?
I think as a staff, we really do try to, but that's just a lot harder because every single high school is either traditional or perhaps on that early college calendar. So to get perfect K-12 calendar alignment for every family that has a high schooler is just physically not possible. We just don't have that many traditional seats in middle and elementary school to make that happen. But we do try as hard as we can. But K-8 is really where the board has asked us to focus our efforts, knowing that there's childcare issues and things like that, particular to those younger students that maybe aren't as prevalent for the older students that are in high school.
I'm not sure that you can answer this one because of the
Okay,
way that it's broadly asked,
okay,
and it's really not our department. But
sure.
what is the future outlook on transportation?
Yeah, so you're right. We not our department. So for transportation, I know that we have made great strides to balance out. So the number of routes that we have established all appear to have a dedicated driver, and then we have additional substitute drivers on the roll, if you will. And so that's an improvement. However, adding additional routes to the district is still very challenging for us. So expanding our transportation is still a big challenge. But I would encourage you, I believe they have conversations about this in the facilities committee on occasion with the Department of Transportation and the chief of facilities. So I would direct anyone who's super curious about that to maybe look at those resources, because as Eric mentioned, that's a little outside of our scope and space, but we have some general awareness. It's getting better, but it's not where it once was.
With stability rules without providing transportation, why does WCPSS want to increase the carpool, which increases the traffic?
Yeah. Please no, we don't want to increase carpool traffic. That is not the goal. The goal is really just to try to offer as much stability for families as possible. And as was mentioned with the transportation question just a moment ago, we don't have sufficient transportation to be able to put students on buses. We do know that principals who have experienced these types of changes in the past do work with their PTAs and their school community to develop maybe carpool groups so that maybe we can reduce the total number of cars that are coming in and out of the carpool line, particularly if you're all coming from the same community. But no, our intent is not to expand carpool. We do know that that's a side effect. Our intent really is primarily to give families that option for stability. We do see that can happen, but it's not the goal, and we know that it would be temporary and short-lived as the students age out.
Do requests for transfer to an uncapped school ever come with transportation if the transfer request school's base is literally across the street?
Oh, maybe I think I get it. So there are some areas, every area has an attendance boundary, and at some point there's a start and stop, right? And particularly with our elementary schools, some of them are kind of close to each other. So some of those attendance areas might, for example, Holly Springs and Holly Ridge Elementary are super close to each other, but at some point we had to draw a line to create the two separate base attendance areas. North Forest Pines and Forest Pines Elementary are on the same campus, but we had to create a division, to develop the two separate attendance areas for those schools. So it is frustrating, I know, for our parents, because we've heard it before through transfers and so forth, to see that there's a bus coming to that school and it picks up right there, but it doesn't turn into your neighborhood, or it doesn't stop and pick up your student. So if there really is a bus route that's that close to your home and your student is on an approved transfer to the school, there is a way to ask for, I think it was called a waiver, I think, Eric, or a special, it's ineligible riders is the word I know. The Department of Transportation has a way in which you could submit a request as an ineligible rider, someone who doesn't technically qualify for transportation, to see if you can fit on that bus and if you can get to that bus stop. But that's all on them to determine whether or not they have space in it, if it's a safe walking distance. There's lots of rules for that. So if you are interested in exploring that, I would encourage you to look at the transportation website or talk to someone at your school who can communicate with someone on the transportation team. I'm not promising anything, but there are ways to ask for it, and I have seen some of those get approved on occasion.
Susan, what are the plans on adding more schools instead of converting schools to year-round and constantly reassigning students? And it sounds like the premise there is if we build more schools, we won't have to reassign students, but that doesn't quite line up.
Yeah. So building schools are expensive, if you can imagine, and it's like numbers my brain can't even comprehend how much it costs to build a school. So there's one restriction we have there's just limited capital funding. If you're not aware, the capital funding that we get to build new schools and to renovate our schools and to do the life cycle projects, take care of the HVAC, maintenance, operations, all those things come through monies that are provided by our Wake County commissioners. So we as a district, our board as board district members do not have the right to levy taxes or assess any kind of property taxes to increase fees. It all comes through the county commissioners. The county commissioners have to weigh their funds availability with parks and libraries and community colleges. And so we're part of that mix of places where they're providing dollars for capital assets. So when we get our funds, those are our funds, and that's all we have to work with. And there's just never, as I mentioned earlier, we've been growing nonstop since quote unquote forever, right? For the last 20, 30 years. We have yet to catch up with our growth. Plus that legislative change at the elementary level created a particularly complex issue for us. So right now, we're doing everything we can and using every tool in the toolbox. If we can build a new school and we have the funds available to do so, we do. If we don't have the funds available to do that, but maybe we can add some trailers to a campus and that'll cover it, we do that. If we've exhausted those options and the school isn't already operating on a multi-track year-round, we might try that to get some extra seats in that school. And when all else fails, we start looking for schools that might have available capacity. Perhaps their demographic has aged out. There's more room in the school than there once was because the community that's living there no longer has a lot of school-age students. So we start looking to do that, or perhaps we've opened up enough schools in the region. And I don't know if anybody remembers me talking about tonight. Now, moving forward, we use a mixture of newer or incomplete developments as well as existing neighborhoods to open a new school. In years past, we didn't do that. In years past, we sort of took a bunch of existing kids, put them in the new school to provide immediate relief. And then as all the new developments that were sprinkled in between started to fill out and overcrowd the school, we would chip away at that assignment area and push it back maybe to one of those original schools. It's kind of what's happening with White Oak and Turner Creek, right? That strategy of taking existing students from the original Turner Creek attendance area as well as the new development and putting it all at White Oak. And then as the new development keeps coming, those kids that were transferred kind of get bounced back to Turner Creek. It's not ideal. It's where we are. We're still responding to those decisions from before, but we're trying to stop doing that. So then then we're left with, I don't have enough money to build a school. I don't have any resources. I can't put trailers on a campus. So changing a school to year round might be the last option I have in the toolbox to try to provide capacity in a particular region. And when I say I'm, the whole planning team thinking through all of these complex issues. So if this is something that's really, really keenly interesting to you, I would encourage you to continue to plug into the facilities committee meetings and to really review our sites on that, because we're starting to put more and more information out there to help families understand this really complex issue for our growing district. It's really a product of us being a continuously growing district.
So I'm going to ask this one and answer it real quick because it's not about assignment. It's about magnet process.
Okay.
We're interested in our student applying for our student to go to a magnet school next year. Could you explain the application process?
Sure.
Please visit our newly refurbished website at wcpss.net/enroll, ENROLL, wcpss.net/enroll, and you will be able to work through everything you need to do to enroll, to start applying for different options, to look at all of the possibilities you can exercise through Wake County Public Schools. Susan, I received an email from WCPSS telling me my address is affected by these changes, but when I enter my address on your site, it only returns information about the elementary school. Those aren't posted yet, so why doesn't it look like my student is affected? I'm guessing it's the address lookup.
Mm-hmm.
The address lookup will not post the proposed information because it is still proposed. It's not voted on yet. So
Oh,
if I'm
there's two
affected, where can
different
I see
address
this?
lookups. Right. So there's
Yeah.
two different address lookup tools. There's the main address lookup tool that's on our regular website for families that need to make decisions now. I've moved, I need to enroll, I need to pre-enroll, those sorts of things. Then there's a different isolated special one about the proposal that's on the proposal site. So let me get you back here. So you want to go to this site and find the proposal address lookup link here. If you're still having difficulties, then please do email us at the student assignment email that I had popped up here earlier. We might have a technical issue that we're unaware of. We've lost Eric. I think he might have to sneeze.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. When will you be evaluating removing the overflow school status for overflow schools who have been receiving huge overflow numbers for 5 to 10 years?
Let me go here. Okay, so the 6-step process that we follow starts with how many students do we think we're going to have over the next handful of years, up to 10? What does crowding look like next year and this year? Like, so what's our snapshot today versus what we're projecting the growth might look like? What capital dollars, that big, long, involved conversation I just had about capital funding, what dollars do we have available and what projects are moving forward and which ones are going to give us new capacity and we need to fill and all those sorts of things. So that's steps 1, 2, and 3. Then you get to here. Okay, so now that we know all of that, we come up with a specific enrollment plan to open those new schools, to address that crowding, to deal with the membership growth, knowing we have this set of assets, if you will, or buildings or school sites. Once that's done, then we know what the board approved and what the board didn't approve. And if the board approves everything we recommend, then we've got a good idea. Then the very next step in the process is to talk about capped and overflow schools. And as part of that conversation, it's multifaceted. One, are the overcrowded schools that have been on the cap list still so overcrowded that they need to remain capped or not? Or have previous assignment changes or calendar changes address the issue and we can take the cap off? Are there other schools that are starting to become so crowded they need to be added to the list? We're trying really hard not to do that, but that may have to happen while we're still responding to growth. And then part 2, the overflow schools that have been identified to partner with those cap schools, can they still support all those overflow students? Do they still have room for those overflow students? Can they effectively be the overflow school in that partnership, or do we need to name a different one? The challenging and complex issue with the overflow schools is if they are serving any overflow students, we have to figure out how to provide stability for those students, because we don't want them to then be overflowed to a second overflow school and then potentially be called back to their main base school and have had to have 3 assignments by no fault of their own by living in their same home. No different from our regular assignment planning process. We really try not to affect anybody more frequently than every 3 years. And even that we're trying not to do. We're trying to do 5, 6, 7 years if we can, or never in a perfect world. So it is a complex conversation, but that'll be initiated with the board about December. So roughly a month after they approve the enrollment plan, we have an idea of what types of conversations with a follow-up discussion with the board in January. By policy, they have to have all those approvals done by April. So we try to get them done well in advance so families know what's happening. So it'll be soon is the short answer, but I gave the long answer first.
Speaking of complex conversations,
Alrighty.
why are new communities getting approvals if there are no schools planned? School planning should be a precursor to new development. I know it's not in your control, but...
Yeah. So similar to the conversation about the capital funding, our district, because we're a county district, we are not connected to any municipality. So the municipalities govern themselves and make decisions for themselves based on what's good for their community and what their individual town commissioners or board members think is right for their community. So there are 2 municipalities that directly reach out to us and ask for us to share what the impact of projected new developments might have on school crowding. And then we give them that information, and then their county commissioners can consider that when they're making their deliberations. The other 10 municipalities do keep us informed, and they let us know what's happening so we can prepare as best we can, but they don't specifically ask the impact on school crowding in that particular area before approving. So it's a matter of the function. Legally, they're not required to. It's really nice that 2 of them do. They're not required to do it. We're open to partnerships with all of them, but it's really a question for your municipal planners and your municipal boards, or city boards, if you will, to ask them about their processes, because it's really something we can't govern and control. We are good partners. I don't want to speak differently about that. We are wonderful partners. We share a lot of data and a lot of information, but we are not a decision maker for them, if you will. They have to make those decisions on their own. But we get it. We understand it.
After this assignment plan is approved on November 18th, will Turner Creek Elementary be hosting tours, open houses for White Oak families who are reassigned?
I've been talking with the staff at the school, and they are prepared to do things like that. So they're already working through those types of preparations, trying to figure out if an evening session might be good or if daytime tours would be good. So I would certainly be on the lookout for communication from their school staff. They'll be reaching out probably December, January, with some invitations, because they're going to wait to see who does the stability transfer first, probably before they start doing all their outreach. While you're looking for another question, I just want to address a basic thought or sense. I know that this year in particular, there were a lot of individual communities, a lot of individual neighborhoods that really, brought forth a case and really wanted to have their assignment change removed, would like to stay where they are. And we get that. And that does not fall on deaf ears. And the planning team does not listen to that, right? It's very much heard. It's very much listened to. It's very much evaluated. And in reality, when we get to the point where we are as staff making operationally efficient recommendations that make us good stewards of taxpayer resources, we ultimately bring forward what is a logistically efficient set of recommendations for the board to consider. And then the board has a tough job to determine whether or not they support that. So it's not easy. It's not, I don't know. I feel like some people think we just go through a checklist and pretend like we're listening. That it's not that. We're very much listening. We're very much authenticating, driving around into communities, looking at the housing developments, looking at the housing patterns, and really falling back on that strategy of those really expansive stability rules to try to provide as much stability for families as possible. But ultimately, the pressure valves have to be released in some of these communities, and the best way to do that is through reassignment. It's actually the least impactful way to do it, candidly, in some cases, which doesn't sound true, but it is.
Can students whose base school is Westlake Elementary go to Hilltop Needmore for kindergarten next year?
If it's your base assigned school, yes. That would be a guarantee because there's a little sliver of Westlake Elementary that's projected to be reassigned to Hilltop. If you're asking, can you be assigned to Hilltop voluntarily? There will be opportunities for people to put in those types of requests in the spring, and those will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So I wasn't sure which of those 2 questions they were asking for, but yes, it will serve kindergarten through 5th grade.
Do you anticipate that you will need to reassign parts of Green Level High's base sometime in the next 5 to 10 years with its current crowding and tremendous growth in their base?
That's the crystal ball kind of question. We're trying really hard not to, but I would be remiss if I didn't remind everybody that Morrisville High School is scheduled to open for 27-28, and it's in the northern region of that sort of area of the county, in the Morrisville area. So the chance that there might be cascading impacts is, I don't want to say is 0. There is a chance, but it's just a little too early to share what any of those might look like. We're currently going through another enrollment forecast. We're going to get updated information this February, which will give us a clearer picture. And we will go back out. We had one set of information sessions for Morrisville High School this past spring. We'll start that activity up again this coming spring as well. So if anyone's interested, just kind of keep an ear out for those either in-person or virtual sessions. We're going to do a little bit more virtual offerings this spring as well.
Our neighborhood was reassigned last year to relieve crowding at Apex Friendship and Olive Chapel. There were significant reassignments to all different schools all over Apex. We were told that the reassignment was significant and disruptive, but our area would not be reassigned for a while. And so do we have areas that have inadvertently been impacted year upon year? I'm not.
Oh, okay. There is one small portion of that region that had recommendations to go from Olive Chapel Elementary and Salem Elementary into Balcom to take advantage of some of the space from the renovation. And that one small section of communities wasn't offered up alignment at the middle school and high school level in that plan. And as part of the feedback from that community, that set of communities, we said we would come in and do a middle school and high school realignment to get that fixed just for that small group. And then that would be it. So that is what's included in this plan, but it's just a small portion of the Apex Friendship high and middle community that is part of the group that was assigned from Olive Chapel. I'm sorry, it's Lufkin. Sorry, Lufkin and Salem Middle and Apex Friendship High. That is currently, because right now they're Balcom Lufkin Apex Friendship or Balcom Salem Apex Friendship, and it was the community shared. That's just a weird cohort. Nobody goes that way. The kids would be very singled out, as they would move through their stuff, and they would be going from traditional to multi-track to traditional, which the district is really trying to avoid. So there are some recommendations to, for lack of a better term, clean that up so that the Balcom students go to Apex Middle, Apex High, which is a very logical feeder pattern and sustainable for the foreseeable future in terms of crowding in that region. But then that area, that's it. That's all we're doing there.
You ready for a softball?
Sure.
Why are there no magnet schools in the West Cary area?
Well, East Cary. I was going to say East Cary Middle. East Cary Middle, Reedy Creek Elementary, but that's not really West Cary. That's Old West Cary, if you will. It's because of crowding. So magnet schools are put together or recommended based on under enrollment or, underutilization. There are certain national metrics that are looked at related to socioeconomic status. I believe race is actually looked at in some cases. And we don't, in our assignment plan, look at that in any way, shape, or form. But the Magnet Schools of America grant programs that come from the federal government that help us to fund those schools have very specific requirements. And so if they don't meet those tests, if you will, or meet those requirements, then they're not identified. So mostly in the Western Cary area, the schools are just too crowded to even support a magnet program, because the tenet of the magnet program is to draw other students from other communities to your school. And so if there's no space to do that, then identifying the school as magnet would be sort of without merit. If you're interested in that, there's a whole, our magnet team does a really good job of explaining that to the board as well.
But this is a good time to rah-rah East Cary.
Yes, East Cary, Reedy Creek Middle, Farmington Woods. That's not really East, it's not really West Cary, but it's Cary. At least it's Cary.
So Hortons Creek, Alston Ridge, Mills Park are capped. When will those school zones be reorganized?
Yeah. So Alston Ridge Elementary, Parkside Elementary, they were reorganized a couple of years ago with the conversion of Pleasant Grove to multi-track year-round. So those are definitely on our list to evaluate whether or not those reassignments had a significant enough impact to change the capping status for those. Hortons Creek has not been adjusted yet, mostly because there's not really a place to reassign students. So we are continuing to monitor Hortons Creek to determine if it should remain capped, if there are other recommendations that should come. Remember, some of our less expensive options would be like to convert to multi-track year-round, which we don't think is popular in that region, or to reassign. So that is an area that we'll probably be continuing to monitor, particularly with the opening of Morrisville High School, the opening of Parkside Middle a couple of years from now. All of those things will weigh in. But yeah, they're on our radar. But Parkside Elementary and Alston Ridge Elementary in particular are quickly resolving themselves with the recent reassignments, so they may come off the cap list, if not this year, next year.
All right. Moving back up, how can I find if a traditional school is capped or if it's not capped?
Yes, there's two ways to do that. Somewhere on they just reorganized our website, so all of us are still trying to find all of our information. But somewhere on the Enroll website, there should be a link to learn information about your base schools. And then within that space, there should be another link to like just learn more about CAP schools. And that has an actual listing of the CAP schools. So if you just want to look at those. But the fastest way is to type in your address. And if you type in your address and you see your school name there, if it is capped, there'll be information right there in that address lookup tool that tells you that the school is capped. So if you're school shopping, like you're getting ready to move, you're going to try to pick a new address and you're trying to see if you're moving into a capped area, then I would encourage you to go find that CAP schools page. And honestly, if you just Google WCPSS CAP schools, it might get you there faster than scrolling through the enroll page, but you certainly can get there by using our new enroll page. Or if you're just talking about your own personal school, just type in your address and it'll tell you the status of all the schools for your address.
I got there in 4 seconds typing in WCPSS capped schools.
Yeah.
All right. I have
Our
two kids in
website's
first
beautiful.
grade.
We're just all learning it. That's all.
I have 2 kids in first grade and kindergarten at White Oak. If I do the stability transfer to White Oak, would my kids then attend Salem Middle School when they are rising sixth
Oh,
graders?
that's a good question. Yeah. Yeah. Every student in the district, even magnet students, as they transition from 5th to 6th or as they transition from 8th to 9th, are by default assigned to the base school for their address. If you don't want to go to the base school for your address, you then would need to take some kind of action to request something different. And so I'm a magnet student at Farmington Woods and I want to go to a magnet middle school. I still have to put in a request to ask to go to that magnet middle school. I'll have all the priorities to get to go, but I need to put in the request. We don't assume anybody wants to do anything really. So yes, by default, they would be assigned to their base school for the address, which if this goes through, would be Salem Middle. Then at that point, as they're transitioning from 5th to 6th, you could make the decision to put in a request for something different. You could put in a request for a magnet school. You could put in a request for a traditional school or any transfer school, but you could take all those steps as they get closer to 6th grade.
I apply to a magnet.
Okay.
Can my student get reassigned from a magnet school in the future? Now, I'm going to assume this means my choice back to the base school as opposed, well, let's answer it both ways.
Yeah, let's answer both ways.
Okay. Yeah.
So I put in a magnet request since we've been, we'll pick a new school, Poe Elementary. So I get my magnet seat at Poe Elementary and I move, as long as I stay in the district, I stay inside Wake County, I move, or even the base assignments for my address get changed. I keep that magnet status at Poe all the way through the 5th grade. And I can use that magnet status to get me priority for the 6th grade at whatever middle school I want to go to. So no, you don't get reassigned. The only thing that can happen and did happen with some of our families on the eastern side of the county is if a new magnet school opens with a similar program, you might lose your transportation to that school if you have transportation, but you keep your magnet status and you can keep going. So that's the only thing I've got to be careful with. It's only happened once in the last, no, it's happened a couple times as we open new programs. So if the magnet schools are opening a new program that's going to be a copy of an existing program, you could lose your transportation, but you would not be reassigned and you can keep your magnet status. If you go through the magnet process and apply for a magnet seat and you get seated and then sort of have second thoughts and then try to put in a transfer to go back to base in the same year, so you get your answer in February saying, yes, you got a magnet seat. And then that March, you put in a transfer asking to go back to base to kind of undo your magnet seat. The only way that's guaranteed is if your base school isn't capped. If your base school is capped, then there's not a guarantee that we can approve those because once you took that magnet seat, an overflow student was called in or a waitlist student was called up. So that seat was given away. We are an automatic assignment district, which means if you ask for something and you get it, that becomes your assignment. There's not an opportunity to decline it, if you will. So that gets tricky. So again, for your specific family, I would encourage you to send something maybe to our student assignment email if you have specific questions about your individual student, if you just want to double check.
You may be familiar because you're kind of shoulders deep in knowing the communities and being familiar. So you may be really familiar with the specific. Will we ever get changed to Horton Creek base like the rest of our community? And it comes from, I guess, what's a small sample.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably goes to Salem now. So in some portions of our district, a strategy was tried, kind of addressing what a lot of questions tonight have asked about new families, new residences, new developments appearing to have preference for the school. So there was a strategy that was used several years ago to take undeveloped portions of land and assign them to farther away schools if they were embedded in a base attendance area for a CAP school, so that if it were to develop, those students would be already pre-assigned to that farther away, not capped school that has room and availability. Salem Middle picked up quite a few of those on that western part of our district. And Salem Elementary, I think, got a couple of them too. So you've got these areas that almost look like little spots that are embedded inside of what looks like a more cohesive attendance area. Over time, our goal as a district would be to create more contiguous attendance areas, but we can't do that till there's seats available. So unless some of these schools that are really crowded and capped start to have a decrease in enrollment because of just natural attrition that happens as neighborhoods age out, as development slows down, or as new schools come online, or as schools become multi-track year-round to create that extra capacity. Someday, there could be a chance that those base assignments could be adjusted. But right now, in this year's plan, they're not included. But again, with the opening of Morrisville, we're going to be looking at that whole region with Morrisville High School and Parkside Middle. So there could be some realignments happening as early as the next 2 or 3 years. So stay plugged in.
So Susan, I don't know.
Oh, we're at 7:31.
Managed to get all of it continually shoved inside your cranium and popping out with all this information, but I appreciate that you're able to do it. Folks, thank you very much. We hope that the session's been informative and that you have a better understanding of the recommendations included in the revised draft of the plan. Separately, we tremendously appreciate your open and honest participation. Your input and feedback is vital to the refinement of the enrollment plan. And remember, we will present a summary of the feedback received in a final draft of the proposal to the board on November 18th, with a final vote expected that same day. Fingers crossed, all of your traditions, hopefully following through. The thought exchange will remain open through November 9. We encourage you to continue to share your feedback through this forum. Please continue to monitor your email and the district website for information and updates. Again, thank you very much for coming tonight, and we hope you enjoy the remainder of your evening.
Thank you all so much for your active participation. We appreciate you.